can find some of my penguin videos. Anyway, good times. So this is about teams, and I think that there's a lot of people who are very excited about teams. It's so much hype. It's so much, very, very rich experience. And especially with COVID, there's been a lot of mass momentum to teams. But I think that there's a lot of people who don't really understand the magnitude. They don't understand what it means to be on teams versus, say, something like Zoom. Zoom is like a video chat kind of platform, and you can do your meetings and stuff like that. But you can't share files in Zoom. You can't use other applications in Zoom. And even Skype. Skype really was horrible at sharing files and collaborating on projects. Teams is absolutely this amazing convergence of messaging, collaboration, and applications. And today, I want to help you understand that really Teams is this next generation platform. Now, I really love this quote, and I think especially for those who actually get this vision, and I kind of feel like this is kind of a woke vision. It's if you actually realize the power of what can happen here with Teams as a platform, you'll understand just how core this is to everything else that's happening in Microsoft 365. And I understand that some companies are very different in their adoption of it, and we'll talk about it a little bit of the maturity model here. But love this quote from Simon Sinek. I'm just going to read it. Leadership is about pointing in the direction, articulating a vision of the world that does not yet exist, then asking help from others to ensure that vision happens. And I would absolutely say, just because you're an admin, doesn't mean there's somebody else who is pointing out the vision. You absolutely can have a vision for the platform and help and make sure that exists. It's not about management. True leadership is about vision. Now, something that's going to guide the rest of the session here and will help us with the agenda, there's a maturity model out there. In fact, this maturity model itself goes back to 1986 when Carnegie Mellon was working with the DoD, and they were trying to figure out how can they build a purpose-built software-based maturity model that can help for optimization, leading to optimization and kind of continuous improvement. And in this, they came up with the first level being kind of the initial environment, where it's often an undocumented state. It's very dynamic, very ad hoc, uncontrolled. When people talk about Teams and SharePoint, often it's, people will say things like SharePoint gone wild or the Wild Wild West. Absolutely, that is level one kind of environment. So when we talk about governance or we talk about maturity, it's how do we get to these greater levels? So level two is repeatable. So when we say repeatable processes, one of the most important things here is templates, consistency, standards, right? And in fact, talking about standards, it takes us to level three, where we have a defined set of standardized processes for improvement. And then we get to level four, where we're talking about processes seen in a range of operational conditions in multiple environments, tested with process refinement, adaptation, and then our ultimate level five, where it's designed around continuous improvement. It's around performance improvement, incremental innovation, and so on, based on technology changes. You'll see how I've taken that model and applied it to Teams, which will help us understand a true maturity model for using Teams as a platform. So the base level here is that initial environment where when you first get Teams, you're using the out-of-the-box apps. You're using off-the-shelf applications, and there truly are, more than 50 that are right in the box. When you start talking about the Microsoft apps and the third-party apps, they're just right there. And when we move up to our next level, we talk about the application templates. So Microsoft has actually built a bunch of app templates, and the community has built app templates. And even Teams itself, you can say, build another team based on this team. So the idea of templating for consistency and repeatability, absolutely, it's there. And you can do that from a policy perspective as well as a feature perspective. And we move up the stack to the defined level. Well, this is where we really start to embrace the maker. People can actually build their own applications with Power Platform, the low code, no code environments. And you'll notice that there is absolutely a key word around the word environment. So by default, everybody gets thrown into the same environment. And I'm suggesting that we actually include a secondary environment, kind of a pre-production, that as soon as we have all these makers, we need to start thinking about the COE. We need to start thinking about centers of excellence around how we can start to get our arms around these people who are building applications, because this is the level where applications start getting introduced. Then we move our way up the stack and we talk about managed environments. This is structured development, multi-tiered environments where we're going from dev, test, staging, production. There may be QA environments. There may be user acceptance testing type environments. There may be line of business based environments, maybe location based environments. But ultimately, this is where environments really start to explode, and manage structure, process, policy, all these things are really critical to a very well-managed environment. And can you believe it? There's actually a level above that that's called optimizing. And this is where we have pipelines, and we're talking Azure DevOps. We're full on automation, metrics, performance. It's going to knock your socks off when you actually realize what is absolutely possible with professional development in a Teams environment, with leveraging all the Power Platform and all these tools I'm going to introduce you to. So this is what we're going to be using for our navigation through the environment. Now, going back to that whole idea of people come from Skype, they come from Cisco WebEx, they come from Zoom, they come from any variety of different chat apps. Maybe it's Discord even. And they think about calling chats and meetings, and they think that that's what it should be about. That's what they think. When they think about Teams, they're thinking calling chats and meetings. They think about it from a telco perspective. And if Teams is actually managed by the telco team, you may actually find that they run Teams like a calling chat and meetings platform. But there's this hidden rich functionality of storage, tabs, applications, like the full-on apps, connectors, bots, channels. There's so much more to this underneath the water iceberg that is Teams. And I absolutely feel like when you start talking about a mature platform, you're only just getting started if you're using it for calling chats and meetings. And that's not to downplay the incredible things that you can do with Teams for meetings and events like this. Like here we are, we're on a platform that's actually leveraging Teams. Super powerful. I ran earlier this year something called the Microsoft 365 Marathon, virtual marathon, and we had 15,000 attendees across 500 speakers, and we ran the whole thing on Teams. Super powerful, amazing what you can do with this technology. So not to downplay absolutely what you can do with chats, callings, and meetings. And that being said, and I don't want to spend a lot of time, but for those of you who may be newer to Teams, yeah, you've got files, teams, chats, meetings, and calls, but it's hooked across your entire tenant. So where all these other workloads are kind of self-contained, where when you're in Stream, you're in Stream. When you're in Exchange, you're in Exchange and Outlook. When you're in SharePoint, you're in SharePoint. When you're in OneDrive, you're in OneDrive. Well, Teams is this very powerful way of connecting all these environments without even realizing When you shared that file to somebody else, it actually stored it in your OneDrive. When you shared that file in the channel, it automatically stored it in a team site. When you collaborated with your team in a multi-user chat, it automatically archived it into a mailbox. It's super powerful. The videos that you're sharing, the recording that's going to happen for this meeting is leveraging Stream. And as when it was announced at Ignite, that actually, even underneath that, is going to be SharePoint again for the storage of those videos. So it's really, really interesting the layers we're talking about here. The rich integration with Yammer, the rich integration with plans, and there's so many more here, especially as this has matured, as it relates to all this. So absolutely, Teams is the hub for modern teamwork. It's this convergence of communication, collaboration, and modern work. I love this vision that this guy said, Ephraim Fried, a few years ago when he was talking about this space. He said, the future of digital working will offer tools that let us tie together communications, content, tasks, application, collaborative work, and other elements together around work streams. Like, I remember even a dozen years ago when somebody's like, when is email going to get integrated in SharePoint? And it's like, oh yeah, well then they added the list that brought your email in. But no, no, no. We're talking full on communication. When my messages and my files and my applications and bots and all those things start to integrate into a common work stream, into a channel where my team can all work in that channel, the messages live with all those things live in such a way that we can actually have a hub of work. And I've absolutely seen this in my work today, where our team rarely uses email to chat amongst ourselves. We're always using Teams for that. And all of our files we work on are in Teams, even though the data is stored in SharePoint. So obviously, those of you who've done more with this understand what I'm talking about. So hopefully these little memes in the corners aren't too distracting, but I want to help you understand and make it fun along the way. Here's our maturity model again, and we're going to start diving in. So initial, people get excited. Teams, cool beans. Out of the box, off the shelf, there's a lot of power. And we even talked about, underneath the water, all that collaboration, all those applications. Yeah, it's exciting. There's a lot you can do right with Teams out of the box. So quick kind of vision of Teams from that perspective. Single hub, reducing context switching, making your decisions faster. It's a great way to be able to integrate your automation, increasing value of productivity, and bringing the productivity and your communication collaboration together. And then as well, you talk about your critical line of business data. There are hundreds of connectors for Power Automate, hundreds of connectors for the Power apps, where you can bring those things in. You can even build your own connectors as well to bring those application experiences in into that interface. So absolutely, it's the hub. Here's just yet another visual of our channels, our bots, our tabs, our files. It's this modern chat-centered workspace. I like the way that that's written. Pulling together the team, everything the team needs, right? It's where our meetings are. It's where our notes for those meetings are. It's where the files for those are. And it's where we really get work done. Super powerful. Another visual. And when you start talking about everything that is across Microsoft 365, I'm a huge, huge fan of this idea of teams first approach. And it does require a more mature environment, because a lot of people, they don't start with Teams. They've already done Exchange. They've already done SharePoint. And so those things have a very, very big footprint. In fact, you may have already done Yammer even. But this approach, especially Greenfield, imagine a world where you start with Teams And then when people share files, it's automatically being shared in SharePoint. It's automatically being stored in their OneDrive when it's just filing, sharing a file one-on-one. It's automatically integrated as a group inbox. It's automatically providing our social channels and a platform for our meetings where we can then as well organize our tasks using templates and the recordings for our videos and plugging in all these different experiences with this idea of let's take an approach where the team is actually defined by the Microsoft 365 group, which equals a team. So much more powerful from that perspective. And I don't want to dive into here, but basically there's absolutely some recommendations I have around governance, around application lifecycle management, around expiration and templates, things around naming standards. If you want to get out of the wild west in that first stage, absolutely, here's what I'm talking about in terms of kind of a unified labeling, unified governance, day forward strategy. Quick reference guide for you. And you're asking the next question, which is, well, what about the licensing? Well, it's true, not all of those lifecycle management features as it relates to Teams are in the E3 license. Some of those, especially things like information barriers, even DLP around chat. If you don't know what DLP is, it's the data loss prevention. So if you want to block people from being able to chat credit card numbers back and forth to each other, you absolutely can turn on those features leveraging the E5. And I'm not here to talk about licensing, but going to that next stage, the repeatable stage, talking about templates and the app templates. And we've been talking for a while. Why don't we do a demo? You may have heard of Microsoft Lists. I think that Microsoft Lists in Teams is super powerful. So here we are in Teams, and I've kind of pulled this, I've maximized it. You notice there's a little button here. This is very useful when you're using Teams at a regular interval. So as an example, what we're going to do is we're going to create a list. So all I did is I went into the tab and clicked the plus. That's all where we're at, okay? We're going to create a list. And notice, look at all these really cool application templates for lists we have. We have an issue tracker. We have an employee onboarding, events and assets and recruitment and travel requests, content scheduler, patients, and more. And this list has continued to grow. Was talking to somebody just yesterday who said they were here not that long ago and there were not this many things here. So this has actually grown. You can as well create a list from Excel or from an existing list. So talking about templates, you don't even have to go off of the ones that Microsoft's built here. So we're going to make this interactive. I'm going to ask you guys to put in chat which one you'd like to see. And the first one that's listed will be the one we choose. And I'm going to ask our moderator to look at the chat for me to see which one they choose, because we're going to make this a little bit dynamic.
Okay, guys, come on, let's pick one.
If nobody types something in the next 10 seconds, I want you to just pick one, moderator.
Patience.
All right, patience it is. All right. So one of the cool things about patience is they've actually done some work here to actually do some compliance around patient data. So that's really cool. It's kind of a special one. So I'm glad you picked that one. But notice as well, if we can actually get a quick preview of each of these different types of lists. So I'm not going to wait for all of them to load, but you can see how here's an example of the incident one. But you can go play with this on your own environment. So we're going to leverage this template for patient. Going to give it a name, and we're going to be really original and just actually call it patients 2. And And we're just going to call it medical records demo. In fact, let's just call it patients demo. Much more original. We can pick a color for it, which is kind of cool. And then we can pick a little icon that we want. Actually, let's go more sciencey. And what is this doing? It's actually provisioning a list in SharePoint. So don't get confused that, oh, lists is some new thing that's on a new environment, a new way to store lists. This is actually a SharePoint list on steroids. It is still a SharePoint list that looks so much cooler inside of Teams. So here we've got our list, and we've got all sorts of interesting things. In fact, we can create items now. It's all ready to go. And it's even got, this Medicaid, Medicare, medical record numbers, whatever. It's got the nice little pickers and things. And obviously, just because it's a template doesn't mean that we can't change it. So if you want to put more insurances in here or whatever, or you don't want insurance, you can remove it. So all these are editable. It's just a way to get started really quickly. And I don't want to take a lot of time here, but I want you to just see how cool this is once we get one. And I'll show you a finished list so that you see just how cool this stuff can be. We even got a picker here where we can pick users as well. And you've got, safe attachments and all those kind of things. So here we've got our list, and look how colorful and interesting it is. And it's integrated right into Teams. Super, super powerful. Why would we want to jump into SharePoint to work on a list when we've got it so accessible to our team? All our team can now go and work on this, and they can even edit it in grid view right in this interface. So we can even add a new item, and we still have the pickers and everything. And there's even some cool, clever things like being able to drag and drop, and just like in Excel. And you can even drag people. Look, this is even a calculated column. I don't know if you noticed the length of stay. It figured out when we were starting and done, and now we've got a calculated column too. Very, very cool little template. Great way to get started building applications inside of Teams without feeling like full-on custom development, something we got to get, making sure we've got plenty of people. Built-in views even, private pay patients, respiratory patients. So there's even some built-in views. There's a fixed height view and an auto fit height view. Really cool stuff. And not to diss SharePoint, we can actually even open it in SharePoint if we want to then go do more work on our list, or we want to edit the columns, and hey, we want our old school, not to diss SharePoint again, but this idea that we can then go and work on our list and see it in the context of our projects. So here's that same list that we can then, go set up a Power App for it, a nice little front end to it. Hey, let's actually set up some reminders so whenever a new one's added, let's create a flow, pretty cool stuff. All this, we get both sides of the world here, super exciting. So that gives you a glimpse of building applications. Oh, I was going to show you another one that's kind of done. I did another list, just real quick. This is we can hit this little thing to get it full screen again. So this is steps to set up SharePoint syntax. So I created a step-by-step set of lists. This was actually built on a template. So you can see it's a task list. So we've got work items, who it's assigned to, the progress, the categories. I can then filter it, group it. I have notifications set up on this so that we can notify people. Imagine a project manager running the project for their team. super powerful interface to be able to then work on things. Um, and as I was mentioning, our ability to edit. Let me just show you as an example how slick this is. So let's say, you know what, everything has just become critical. I can now drag critical across all these, and now they're all critical. These are all part of the engineering phase. I can grab the corner here and just drag up. This is all engineering. And so on. I don't want these to be Joel. I want this one to be Chris. Our solution architect who's on. And you can see now, anyway, I must have clicked. Not sure what's going on there, but that hasn't happened to me before. Anyway, really slick stuff for being able to then pull this all together. Oh, I guess it was there. It just wasn't refreshing. Okay. Back to our deck.
So we have a question. Is there a way to bring assignments into to-dos?
There is some work that Microsoft is doing around pulling together those kinds of things. I couldn't tell you where that's at right now, but the tasks that are built in lists right now, they're I would say they're separate, but your ability to pull all those together, that work is being the work is being done to pull together your task lists across all sorts of different places, including SharePoint,
Great.
including lists. Yep.
Hey, Joel, so just to help
Yeah.
out on that one, you might,
Sure.
until Microsoft releases something where it could tie the two together, you might be able to just set up a flow to actually, when a new item is created, bring that into your to-do from lists, since lists has a
That's
built-in
true. You
tie.
could use a Power Automate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the notifications could be in to do. That's a really good point. I like that. Thanks for that, Chris. So when we talk about Teams as an application platform, you just saw an example of tabs where you can create a tab for lists, or tab for SharePoint, or a tab for your document libraries, whether they're in SharePoint or in Citrix or in Box and so on. There's bots that you can add, and there's a bunch of other things you can do, like message extensions, adaptive cards. Obviously, the more you get into this level, you're getting into more of the more rich development experiences, but you can do quite a bit with the applications here, right in the tabs, and adding bots that have already been built, leveraging the app templates. So Microsoft has built a bunch. These are just a few of the ones that they started with. There's actually quite a few more now, but things like FAQ Plus, that is a bot and answers questions based on a corpus. There's an icebreaker bot to introduce people in the team, so you can kind of help people get to know each other. There's an HR support bot. What was another kind of cool one? Is this company communicator? Anyway, there's a bunch here. I think the one that really woke me up to the power of building these application templates was the virtual rounding. So virtual rounding was early in COVID. We had the nurses needing to visit all these places. Well, PPE became a problem, right? I think we all kind of know that we're talking masks and gowns and stuff, that every time they would go visit a patient, they would need a new mask because it could get soiled, or there was the concern about a known patient who has an infection. And so they could reduce the amount of visits. They would still do some mandatory visits, but they could do a lot through video chat. And so they leveraged Microsoft Teams to then set it up such that the machine that was in the room, they could then basically do their virtual rounding of, hey, are you okay? Do you need anything? They could do those roundings to check things through leveraging Teams. And this has been used by a number of hospitals. There's some great resources. If you just search for virtual rounding in Microsoft Teams, you'll actually find a lot of resources. In fact, they're on their second or third version of it. I was in a hackathon recently where we actually built some add-ons to this, where we added some Power Automates and we added some Power Virtual Agent integration with this to extend what it could do. And that's the power of templates and these app templates is just because you get it, it doesn't mean that you can't extend it or do more with it. So that's super powerful. So now we're talking about the level 3, the defined level. So in defined, we're talking about custom applications, embracing the maker community, line of business that want to start building their own apps, especially leveraging the power of the Power Platform. So there's a maker movement. It's all about DIY. People who want to make stuff, they want to build stuff, they want to take technology and build a connector or leverage a connector and build solutions for the business. Really, really cool. And I understand that maker is a bigger movement outside of people who just like to tinker and they like to see how things work. Well, that same kind of movement is happening inside the business. And you may already see this inside your organization where people who are traditionally not IT people, but have tech, they may have some tech skills or they may have a knack for technology, their ability to build a form or their ability to build a little app. You'd be surprised by how many people have launched their careers. Just watch some of these technology events like Ignite or Inspire, and you see these people who, there was one guy at I forget if I'm pretty sure it was Pepsi. Anyway, he's like using object detection AI builder to essentially build an app that can automate his job and launched his career. It's amazing to hear some of these stories. But this Gartner estimates that 65% of all app dev will be low code by 2024. It's pretty amazing, this low code, no code revolution that's happening. And even a lot of these people, they start in the low code drag and drop kind of world, and then they move into it being low code and, hey, let me add some CSS or let me add some JavaScript. And it's amazing what they can do. And so when you start looking at the skills across your organization, you can see how the Power Platform really goes from all the way down to the beginning to much more pro dev advanced type skills where you can do so much with the Power Platform. Don't think of it only as a low code, no code solution. And absolutely, you'll be able to see a little bit of that with what Chris has planned. A little visual here when you start talking about people making apps. Yeah, there's we talk about that previous tier where you've got all those off the shelf, out of the box apps for integrating with ADP or integrating with Trello or Rike or Adobe. There's a lot of stuff, or DocuSign, bunch of apps that those first party companies built and have integrated into the Microsoft Store, essentially into that app store of the Microsoft Teams apps. Well, your ability to empower the organization comes with their ability to, say, build apps with Power Apps. And what was just recently announced is Power Apps will actually be included right inside of Teams. You'll be able to create Power Apps right inside of Teams. Super, super powerful. So don't think of these as fully separate apps. In fact, I was just talking to Chris just yesterday, and he was saying of all the apps that he's built recently, only one of them was standalone. Almost all of them are attached to Teams in one way or another. I don't know if you want to talk more about that, Chris.
Yeah, so for the last 12 or 13 months being really focused on just Power Apps, We've deployed a ton of apps to large organizations, healthcare, sales, and only one of those has been directly through a Power app on a client mobile phone. And the only reason it was utilized that way is so that they could have it on the go for nurses that were kind of out and about. But if you're thinking about the everyday person that's, in an office, at a desk, or at their home now with COVID, they're in front of a screen. So they're going to be in Teams having that conversation, having that chat. So if you're talking about a nurse in a hospital, right, they're going to have their EMR open. They're going to have these other things open also. So why not just make that a tab within Teams, centralizing everything as the hub of their modern workplace that they can just switch over to with that other tab and have the app right directly in line with what else they're doing.
It's awesome. Yeah. And so when you start talking about what you can do with the Power Platform, and then you start talking about the verticals, or you start talking about line of business integration. Hey, we've got our data in this Oracle database, or we've got our data in this Azure data lake, or our data's in SharePoint, or there's obviously, it's easy to get at your data that's in Microsoft 365, but don't just think about those. You have the power of the connectors, where you can actually, and these connectors are off the shelf connectors even. There's so many that you can actually use to connect to line of business data as well. Now, the more that you have people building stuff, the more that's like, well, how do I get my arms around this? And we're talking centers of excellence. How do we actually organize our team that manages the platform? And how do we manage these champions? How do we discover the biz app champions in this community? How do we establish processes across this platform? How do we do rapid prototyping and understand who's doing what? Because we don't want to go back to the Wild West. We actually want to have good policies and process along with trainings and workshops to empower the business. And absolutely, it's people, process, technology, which ultimately means governance, but it's empowering. It's not to be stifling. This is to be empowering. Okay. So Microsoft, and this the way that this grew up, it actually started in an organization and actually grew up out of that into this Center of Excellence starter kit. You can check it out, aka.ms/COE starter kit. It's absolutely a work in progress. I heard, I don't want to oversell this because there's some super cool stuff in here, and you may think this is going to solve all your problems. It's not, but it is going to give you visibility. It is a tool for this governance that I'm going to be talking about. But it's essentially a templatized implementation of sets of best practices around environments, and we'll dig into environments a little bit more later.
So Joel, we
Yeah,
have a question. It's actually a really good one. Sorry, I was trying to find an opportune time to break in.
yeah.
Joseph wrote, do people have a problem with non-IT staff trying to create apps and stuff that really becomes an IT troubleshooting for all the non-IT apps? It reminds me of back in the days where Access databases became the thing.
I think that a lot of people would think about it from that access perspective. And I think that IT may be freaked out. And I think a lot of organizations, they may turn off apps. And as a result of turning off the ability to create apps, or only IT can create apps, they very, very likely will stay in those kind of less mature stages. It's really when when you embrace the organization, but there's a lot of structure that you need to put in place. And what we're going to see in this even in the screenshot is how to get visibility of what's happening across the environment. And especially when you talk about access. Access is a great example of one where somebody in the business creates an app, and all of a sudden everybody starts using it, and it's on somebody's client, right? That's a big problem, and we understand why. But you think about how empowering that stupid little Access app is, and everybody's saying, but it saved us all this time. Well, the difference between that, where it's totally shadow IT, it's, this person has some really cool idea and they built this thing. Well, how can we seize on that? How can we actually take that energy and say, instead of creating that under your desk, here's an environment. And you know what? We're actually going to set up a dev environment for you or pre-production environment for you. And we're going to manage the HR environment, pre-production environment, where you can build your form to collect the employee benefits. If every time it's benefit renewal time and there's 100 apps that need to get created, IT can't handle it. And that's what this is about. This is about scale. This is about embracing those makers and giving them environments. And so, going back to that COE, a lot of the COE is about training and certification. You don't have to let everybody create apps. You can say, in order to create apps, you need to go through this training course where you're going to learn what our policies are. It goes back to the SharePoint days of Wild Wild West. Anybody can create a site collection and then start, not following best practices. Well, what we want to do is we want you to, if you're going to be a site collection admin, you need to understand a little bit about security. You need to understand a little bit about lifecycle management, about cleanup, and how you're going to be responsible. But guess what? This is about champion programs. This is about embracing this maker culture. And so in this screenshot, and I don't have a lot of time to spend here
Joel,
in particular.
Can I hop real quick?
Yeah.
Okay. So on that point, I think Joel hit it, right? So by default, everybody gets that standard environment that's best practices to use that for personal productivity. But if you want to set up another environment for, your makers to go test and go do things, this COE toolkit and establishing a baseline of the DLP policies can restrict what people can and can't connect to, right? So if you have data that's confidential that you don't want people getting to, you can restrict them from pulling in that into their app or into, what they're building versus an Excel file or versus another connector that's out on the market that you haven't certified within your organization. So, you have the environment level where you can restrict who can get in and who can build things. You also have the connector level where you can, kind of restrict who can and can't use what connections to outside sources, apps, or anything like that. And then you can also kind of restrict who has access to even share those things. So those are also good things to point out. And I know IT gets a little scared sometimes when you start connecting to data sets. But if all of those policies and procedures and the trainings are in place, you lay the foundation for a good framework for the organization to champion those people and not hinder kind of the organization's development as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that a lot of that policy, and it is absolutely, this is not day one. This is, you've gone through those various steps to get to this part where you don't want everybody creating their own custom connectors on day one. You very likely have an approval process for creating connectors, as an example, so that you can create your policy on that. But as an example, what's great about this is getting visibility into who are the people who are creating the apps. Access doesn't give you that, right? Access won't tell you there's this app that everybody's using and it's under this person's desk. Well, there's absolutely kind of an interesting thing where if IT is too hard tightening things down, they will go find other SaaS environments somewhere else to get their work done. Like, you tell them that they're going to do it over email, or they're going to do it over Box or Dropbox, or they're going to create a form in SurveyMonkey or whatever. And it may not be that SurveyMonkey is your standard. You know what I mean? Like, there's the corporate standards and there's the stuff that you don't want them to use. How do we create an environment in a place where we want them to work? And here's some examples, like Chris was saying, you can control some of these things. Well, guess what? You just created a flow. Well, you used an unauthorized connector in that flow. or you build a Power App. Well, your Power App is uncompliant because it no longer has an owner. So there's things you can do around policies. Um, this little app has been flagged for archiving because it hasn't been modified since May 2019. There's life cycle that you can then integrate into this to keep your arms around what is getting created. So you're absolutely capturing ownership. I'm a big fan of certification. I'm a big fan of having the community that you can work with. So you get to know these people who are actually creating these things, and you understand and are grabbing business justification. And what this is really going to do is it's going to cement your position in the organization, but it's also absolutely going to help you keep your arms around the environment, because it goes from being chat calls and meetings to being, this is actually running the organization. This is really where we get our work done. And I think you'll see a little bit more of this, especially those of you who come from a SharePoint world, this N-tiered application. So we started briefly touched on the idea of environments. So environment is our Power Apps, our flows, our Dataverses by default. When you give somebody Power Apps licenses, they're assigned to a default environment. But we can actually create multiple types of environments. And there are different types. There's production environments, there's sandbox environments. In fact, got a slide. Yeah, here it is. I'll jump back to that other one. Different types of environments. We've got our sandbox type environments. We've got trial, where it's a 30-day trial. Let somebody go bang on it for a while, and then in 30 days, it's gone. It's a limited to one user, but we can actually have as many trial environments as we want to let people learn and understand what happens here. There's developer licenses as well, or developer environments based on the community plan. And so looking across the bottom here, you can see we've got an environment for our developers where they're working in a sandbox. We've got test and staging, or test and user acceptance, or any kind of, how do we do our validation before things are then rolled to production? And based on our time, I'm actually going to jump to the demo that I have in stage 5, but I'm going to hand it over to Chris to show us an environment that he's actually built that's real pro dev stuff. You want to take over, Chris?
Yeah, let me go ahead and hop over. All right, can you all see my screen? Can you see my screen?
I don't see your screen yet. I see, okay, someone else said yes.
Okay. Let's try this again.
Okay. I see that you have control.
Okay. Let's see. What about now?
Yes, okay. Absolutely. Yep.
All right. So when we're talking about building apps within Power Platform, every app or everything that you build should be contained within a solution. And there's 2 types. There's an unmanaged solution where you can move it from environment to environment, but it's not self-contained. So if I was to delete the solution, the pieces or the remnants that were inside that solution would still exist in the environment. So that might be fine for a pre-dev or a dev environment where people are, kind of working as they go, they'll clean it up. But when you start moving into like a QA environment for testing for users, or into a prod environment, that's not what you want, right? You want it clean, you want it validated, and you want to keep that well maintained. So what we're going to show here is I have a Azure DevOps environment that I've hooked up to my Power Platform, and I'm going to pull a solution that I have from within Power Platform to DevOps. It's going to bring in my app. It's going to bring in the entity or table associated with it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to push it back to an environment as a managed solution. And when I do that, the app will function just like it would have before. I don't need to start anything. I don't need to publish anything. I don't need to do anything. It's just ready to go as it would be as if I manually did this. And so when you think about kind of this process and what this does is, if you have a change control process and it needs to go through 3 approvers and CAB and everybody else before it goes into your QA or your prod environment, you could set up a SharePoint list or tie to Jira or tie to DevOps. And as those goes through the approval process and you do get the approval, you can schedule this to run on its own. So we'll go ahead and kind of quickly show how this works. So I have 2 pipelines that I've created, and these pipelines basically contain my tasks for taking care of these actions. So the first one we're going to open is going to be this export to DevOps. So this is going to be my task where I pull in my solution from the Power Platform. That's a zip file. I store it in my repository within DevOps, and then it unpacks it. So it unzips that zip file and puts all of the contents into my repository. So I'll quickly just go over the agent and what this does. It's very simple to set up. So we're going to have the Power Platform tool installer. So this is, since this all runs in the cloud, you'll need to install the tool. This does it automatically behind the scenes. The next piece is whenever you're going to export or import a solution, you want to make sure you have the latest and greatest. So we're going to publish the customizations. We'll then export the solution. You can do this as managed, unmanaged. You can rename the solution, and you can connect this to multiple environments. We'll finally kind of unpack that solution, extract what was in the zip file, and then with the command line script that I can share with you all, it dumps it out to that repository so I can physically see what's contained within it. So I'll go ahead and stop there. Any questions, comments? Perfect. So I've already run the one for the extract. So I've pulled in my solution. And if I go to my repository, it's going to show the solution name, Power Build Tools. It's going to show my app. So my Canvas app is here. All of my tables or my entities are going to show up underneath, as well as all of the details surrounding them. And then anything else. So my customizations, the relationships, entities, and then the solution file contained. So just to keep in the context of what we're trying to do here, I set up a quick tab within Teams, and I'm going to go to my pipeline. And I'm going to start the process of importing this into my Power Platform environment. So if we look at the solutions here, we don't see anything named Power Platform. So there's no smoke and mirrors. And I'll go ahead and run this. And as this is running, you can see it run live on screen by clicking on the agent. So it's going to queue up the agent, and then it's going to run through all of those tasks that we just went through a few seconds ago.
So super high level, what we're doing is we're moving a solution, right? We're moving an app.
Yep. Yeah, so we're essentially
another environment.
Yeah, so if you think about it in terms of your ALM process and you're trying to move something from a pre-dev to dev or dev to QA, you set up a task to ingest from your originating environment. So if we're using the sample of a dev to QA migration, I'm going to pull all of the stuff from dev associated with my solution. I'm going to save it in a place that's secure. It's not downloading to my local machine like it would do if you manually do this within the Power Platform. And then the next thing is it's going to export that to the environment that you want it to go to.
Pretty robust.
So it's already installed the tool. It's already checked out the files. It's already packed back up that solution. So it's zipped those files back up together. And now it's in the process of importing that into my environment. So in a minute, we'll see that pop up here after this completes.
Do you have a rule of thumb of when you use DevOps versus just building stuff kind of straight up?
Yeah, so I typically like to start out building the solution until I get it to a good state. So when I know the application is working in a pre-prod, non-prod environment, what I like to do is do that manually so I can work out all the kinks, make sure all my relationships, make sure the applications are functioning great. Once I get to that state, that's when I'll go through and start adding the ALM processes to it to tie to DevOps and start automating it, because then my hands are out of it, right? So everybody gets tired 8, 9 p.m. when we're doing a push to prod, and you make the stupid error of clicking on the checkbox when you should on the checkbox, and then you blow the whole thing up as it's supposed to go to prod. And I don't want to do that. So pre-dev, you can do manually. Dev, you could do manually if you wanted, but any of those moving to QA, moving to prod scenarios, I like to handle with this.
Yeah, it basically gives us standardized processes, consistency from environment to environment.
Yeah, and it keeps the user out of it. One thing that the clients have liked about it is it's not tied to an individual, right? So let's say I was to leave tomorrow, or for some reason, this will still run. This is still going to run under the service account. This is still going to run under whatever account has been created for it, and it's not dependent on an individual. So you're not held hostage by anything.
Right, right.
So if we look at this, we see that it completed successfully. Within DevOps, it's created an artifact for my solution that contains my zip file of what was there, how it zipped it up, so that we could revert back to it in case we needed that. And if I go over to my solutions, we'll see that it's already here. So the cool thing about this is normally when you import applications between environments, you need to do adds and tweaks and modifications to get it going. If I just click on my solution and I open my app, this is going to run the first time. There's no bells and whistles. There's no touching. There's no adjusting anything. So the only thing that's not going to be here is data. So what we'll do really quickly is we'll hop in and we'll generate some data for this.
Nice.
So now it's showing live on screen. It's functioning. It's working. It's pulling data from the Dataverse CDS entity that I have tied to it. And there was no special bells and whistles that I had to do after I imported it. It just worked, which is the best part of it.
Yeah, and I think what you just did here is you just opened up this huge, huge world that, SaaS apps, we kind of feel like, oh, we don't have control. We really can't do all these things. What you just saw takes me back so early in the server world, where it was like setting up our dev environments, our test environments, and our production environments, and being able to push things between those environments, and all the work we would need to do around structured dev, test, production, and getting our QA lined up. Now you can imagine how powerful this would be when you're actually building full-on rich applications like intranets and those kinds of things.
Yeah, definitely. So to Ryan's comment in the window, so with setting up this, you can set it up in two ways, and I'll show you real quick because it's pretty simple to get to. So when you use the Power Apps build tool, you don't necessarily need to use a username and password to do this. You can do this via a service principal connection, and you have the option of setting up with that username and password directly to that environment or the SPN. So if I do this, this is going to ask for some additional pieces, but you have a whole list of options that you can connect to, right? So, do you want to do OAuth? Do you want to use Azure? Do you want to do a generic? And if you do a generic, it gives you, what's the Dynamics URL for it? What's the username and password or the token that you're going to use? And then you can obviously name that.
Yeah, so you can do the app service stuff, right? And
Yes.
even MFA I saw there, which is pretty cool too.
Yes.
So we had a question. Is there any tips, or did we get the question answered? Because I had to step away. It looks like we got it answered. Great. By the way, we're coming up on 20 minutes, guys.
Yep. All right, so let's bring it back. Thanks a lot, Chris.
No problem.
I will go back and share. There it is. Sorry about that. It's just going a little bit slow. Tell me when you can see my screen.
We can see your screen.
Great. Great. Thank you for that. All right. So we were just talking about environments and how you can have separate environments. And with the thing that Chris just showed, our ability to move applications between these environments. And what you didn't see behind the scenes is there are so many different tools for professional developers who are building solutions in Teams, um, from connectors to the Teams App Studio, full-on Azure DevOps, Yeoman, uh, the .NET Framework, Node, webhooks, lots of really cool tools for being able to build things. In fact, SharePoint developers may be excited to know that if you build stuff in SharePoint Framework, you can actually build it and have it work in Teams or in SharePoint, leveraging the SharePoint Framework. So you kind of build once, use everywhere kind of ideas as well. One of the things the product team just recently announced is the Teams site home app, or the home site app in Teams. Yeah, Teams home site app, where basically you can pin your modern communication site, your company branded top level app in Teams, in this kind of immersive experience with full on navigation, mega menus, intranet search, where it'll actually search against your intranet. Um, there's a quick access bar. There's this ability to kind of see my sites all right there. There's a really cool app bar experience that kind of pops out. It's contextual targeting for news. There's a lot of really cool stuff that comes in, and you'll notice right there, top left-hand corner, that where it says Contoso with a little drone-looking thing. That's a company branded entry point. So basically, right in Teams, you can put your intranet right there. So that ability to pull it right in and have contextual experiences, search right on your intranet, that global nav that relates to your top level navigation of your intranet. So those of you who may be thinking, oh, well, SharePoint really has existed in these two worlds, you can actually really marry those things up. So that idea of Teams and SharePoint loving each other, absolutely. These things work so well together, and Microsoft has been spending more and more time so that it's even richer and richer integration. So in this last stage of our maturity model, I want to talk about that, kind of what you saw with what Chris was just showing, where we kind of did jump ahead looking at this optimizing level. You may have seen a little bit about the Dataverse, and where lists is cool, but Dataverse is even that much cooler when you start getting more into the professional development. The tool that you saw Chris using is this Azure DevOps Power Platform build tools. So these Azure pipelines. So you can definitely check that out. This allows you to create, delete, copy, backup, restore environments where you can back up your tools, your solutions, provision, deprovision environments, building artifacts. talking about source control and doing real development in Microsoft 365, leveraging Visual Studio. Super, super cool stuff.
Hey, Joel, so I tossed all of those links that are kind of associated with what I just demoed. So creating the service connection, setting up the Power Build tools, all of that stuff is in the chat if anybody's interested.
Oh, cool. Thanks for that, Chris. I'll have to get those added to the deck as well. I'll do that before I share the deck. And I actually want to point this back at you, Chris. I think you've done more cool stuff with Graph than anybody I know. Do you want to talk about how you leverage the Graph API when you're building from an administration perspective, even around provisioning and the connections, kind of building and extending experiences, both from an administration perspective, which I think a lot of people on here are admins. So being able to understand what you can do with Graph versus, say, PowerShell.
Yeah. So I put out a couple apps to within our organization or to clients specifically, and even shared some on SharePoint Saturday, automating administrative related tasks. So, provisioning teams, cloning teams, adding members, all surrounding the utilization of the Graph API. Reason being, I used to be a sysadmin and I hated going to lunch and getting a call about how somebody wanted something, and I had to hurry up, and rush back to do that work. So what I'll show real quick is how I use the Graph API in my tenant and for Proficient and for some of our clients to automate the entire process of Teams provisioning, adding of owners, of users, of setting up some templates and cloning those so that the process from start to finish is just standardized and easy. Fill out a form, send it in. You have a workflow behind the scenes that takes care of all the actual busy work. And if somebody approves it, it gets generated for you without having to do more than a click of a button. So I'll actually hop over and share my screen real quick.
Yeah, go for it. I will stop sharing.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yep.
So SharePoint Saturday last September, October in Southern California, I did this session where I was using the Graph API clone a team action. And what it was for was to essentially be able to create a standard template for teams. Sometimes if somebody creates one service desk person creates it, it has one naming convention while another has another naming convention. And for me, that it doesn't work because as you're doing audits or as you're trying to keep your organization in check, you're missing some of the key things that you want to keep consistent. So what we did was we tied the Graph API action for clone a team to a Power App. So just pulling something up real quick. All right. So I have this Power App here that shows me the status of requests for team cloning or team creation. If I come in here, I can type a team name. Select from a choice of 2 different types. And I hit next. And this essentially submits it for the approval process and gets it going. So it took less than 5 seconds. There was no additional work. The request is off to the service desk or the admin to review and approve, see if that already exists, or kind of navigate me to the right direction. So this was kind of phase 1, and this all kind of goes through using the Graph API clone a team action. So if I take that a little further and I go over to Teams, The next iteration of this was actually this Teams management app. So what we did was we tied all of these individual Graph API actions to Teams administration related activities. So if I need to see if a team exists and the details surrounding it and what it's for, I can use the get a team. If I want to clone an existing team or create an existing new team from an existing, I have that. Channel creation, the addition of owners, members. If a team no longer serves its purpose, we can also use the archive a team. And then as well as the removal of channels, members, and owners too. And all this is just out of the box using the Graph API with some basic buttons that tie to Power Automate for it. Anything else that you wanted me to hit on, Joel?
That's powerful stuff. I think it's probably blowing people's minds. I'm just imagining people being like, "Do I have to do this?" And the answer is no, you don't have to. But I think that the what's possible, the fact that you can automate being able to adding people to a team, or like if there's a common request of, hey, we really want to we want to clone a team or whatever. Microsoft's been doing a lot around templating, so a lot of the functionality they've built since. But the fact that everything's accessible through an API, so that you can actually build solutions, build automation around it, shows the power of just how extensible the entire environment is. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
So I want to just kind of wrap this up, and we'll leave a few minutes for questions. This is not something I created. This was something created by Nick Fratello, where it basically pulls together, here's all the Dynamics applications. Here's some of the off-the-shelf Office 365 apps, which obviously is not extensive. I don't think that was his forte. I think his forte is probably Dynamics. But you can see it's like you got a bunch of the Azure services, and there's 600 plus services talking about, I've spent a lot of time with SharePoint Syntax lately, so I've really been diving into the cognitive services that SharePoint Syntax is built on top of. You start talking about AI Builder leveraging Power Apps, the Dataverse storage, which integrates with, gives you a lot of functionality that Dynamics gives you. That whole area of the common data service has basically been renamed. It was Project Oakdale for Teams. Now it's Dataverse. So when you saw that little meme there that may have been confusing to a lot of people, that's related to the hot new thing is Dataverse, which is essentially this evolution of now a free version, or at least a version of CDS that's essentially included with Microsoft Teams. So Microsoft has definitely been leaning in on the idea of Teams as a platform, and our ability to build applications, as you could see with some of the stuff Chris was showing, has gotten richer and richer. You saw what you could do with just creating templates with like a list and creating really powerful applications inside of Teams, to super powerful applications that you can connect to your line of business data. And with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. I am an open connector on LinkedIn. So if I see that you're an IT person and somebody who's like us, I'm happy to accept your connection. So you you can search for my name. I'm actually pretty unique on LinkedIn. In fact, we probably already have connections in common. It's a pretty small world in this Microsoft world. But with that, we'll open it up for questions. And yes, this is a map of my travels. Orange is the places I have been. Gray are the places I'm going to go in the next 3 to 4 years. So my plan was to finish by age 50, and I guess that does age me a little bit. But was planning on finishing in 2022, but COVID kind of slowed that down a little bit.
Hey, Joel, so we got a question.
Yeah.
So I worry about the governance and over empowering people, where the balance is and how do I find where that is. It's kind of a moving target.
Yeah, and I would actually go back to, we started this whole thing by talking about the maturity model. I actually would encourage people to follow the maturity model. I think that your initial deployment should be focused on getting the out of the box applications, and then focusing on templates, and then focusing on a pre-production environment, and then focusing on integrating your intranet, integrating a full-on development team, and then talking about DevOps. So I absolutely see that as not, hey, let's skip to layer five. I do think this is actually where you actually need to spend time at each of these tiers around the maturity model. This is a full-on maturity model where people are going to try and force you into doing DevOps on day one. No, no, no. Absolutely, I think that you need to spend time and gain competence at each of these levels.
Yeah, I would just add that, like, in addition to all of those things, is making sure that you have environments associated with each of those things, right? And that you have the right policies associated with each of those environments. So in personal productivity, you might want to allow them to have access to only a couple things. But when you tie to, a true dev line of business environment, you might want to open up the connector so that they can tie to ADP, or they can use a in-house custom connector. And all of that stuff is, easily changed, but it comes on, it's dependent on iterations of this going through and going from initial to repeatable to defined, and working through what is best for you all, your organization, and then those users. So you don't stifle the innovation, but you also leave the door open for them to help your IT.
And I would even suggest that it's not you're not going to do this with the enterprise at each level. It may be specific business units. It may be working with specific dev teams. Um, it would be absolutely wild west crazy to turn on a lot of these things from day one. You really want to be able to get your arms around it, feel comfortable with it, get the right training, get build up your champion program. There's a lot of adoption that are part of these steps as well, where you're working your way through this. Where we're talking about fairly mature environments, but there absolutely is a way to kind of work your way through this to where it's a teams first environment, and people are using the Teams interface for things like customer service. And and to get Teams customer services, you're working with customer service, you're integrating their bot, you're integrating their ticketing system, you're integrating, so basically you're building an environment for each of these departments. And ultimately, if they're building the apps and plugging them in, you're building an environment for them to do the development in, and helping them in that prop from dev to test to production, and they're building their structure and processes around it. So much of this is about process, the people, process, and technology. You've got the technology. Now it's a matter of ensuring, do you have the people? There's some, if you're trying to do all this on your own, you may never get out of some of those early stages because you're just not staffed for it, and it absolutely takes the right amount of people as well to be able to be able to get to those more mature environments, and the skills that are required as well.
Okay, Joel, sorry, but we are like coming up on time. There's one other question out here. Are there any specific metrics you use to move through each of the maturity levels, or do you have a template checklist to ensure time is spent on at each? Do you have any type of metrics or anything you can share?
At this stage, I don't, but I do think that it would be appropriate to have a checklist to be able to say, these are the things we need to ensure that we have in place before we move to the next level. A great example of that is that COE starter kit. Whether you use Microsoft COE starter kit or you've built your own Power BI charts and graphs to be able to pull in who's building apps, what are those apps, how mature are those apps, who are the owners of those apps. There's a number of things that you need to do to ensure that you appropriately have your arms around the environment to ensure that you can continue to move to that next stage. Like, I think a lot of people are never going to get out of stage 3. Like,
Okay.
it's custom apps and there's a pre-production environment, and that's as far as they get. I think most
So,
environments out there today are in the first 2.
okay, thank you. Well,
Yep.
guys, I want to give people time to flip over to their next meetings. I have one piece of housekeeping to take care of. Like I mentioned in the beginning, we're giving out one $25 gift card. I'm excited to announce that Joseph Russell is the person that's going to receive this one. We will be getting hold of you. I've got your email address, so thank you. So I'm going to close down this session, and again, this video will be available on our site in the next couple of days. So thank you, Chris and Joel, for all your great insight. It was a great presentation. I learned a lot. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Teresa. Thanks for moderating this for us.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
I've already got some people asking for a link to the recording. So
Give me a few minutes, guys. Give me a few minutes.
thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hey, Norm. Hey, everybody.
Hugo, how are things?
Things are wonderful, thank you.
Have you recovered from your first talk?
I have, thank you. It's not as much me as the people who attended the talk that have to recover.
Joel, hello again. It's Norman. We met through trying to get an engagement together with you and some of your colleagues at Brock University in Canada, if you recall, earlier in the summer.
Wow. Yeah.
How are things, man?
Good. Doing well. It's great to see you here.
Likewise. I just caught the last bit of your session, and it looked very interesting. I wish I saw the whole thing.
That's quite the compliment. Thank you.
Yeah, we actually shortened our presentation because now we'll just say whatever Joel said.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right. Right.
We're just going to echo what Joel and company said. Here we go. Very good. And Teresa, are you moderating? Excuse me.
I think she's given up on us.
That's okay.
We'll give Teresa like 3 minutes or so, and then we'll get started.
Sure. And I'll.
It's great to see April on here as well. I just want to say congrats to April before I drop off. It's cool to see you here.
I'm going to get the splash screen going on the presentation, Hugo.
You want? Are you? Yeah.
So why don't I just run it through until my piece of it is done. When I'm in this mode on a single monitor, I can't see anything.
Okay. So we'll talk about you.
I said see, not here. I just want to check one thing. Let's see how many friends we have with us today. Ah, this is a great group.